Commissioner Dr. Sharon Meieran, Dr. Patricia Charles Heathers, Dr. Jen Vines, I'm feeling a little outnumbered right now, and then Rachel Banks, our Public Health Director. And welcome to our beautiful Multnomah County Health Headquarters. Multnomah County has a unique responsibility as both the Board of Health and the local public health authority to protect the health of our residents, to protect the health of our people, especially our little people, our curious toddlers and our curious teens. And that has been a challenge when it comes to e-cigarettes. Within a few years of their arrival in this country, we saw firsthand how an unregulated product was being widely sold in this county, placed directly next to the sweet and sour candy that kids love. And they are so easy to use. They look like a charger or a pen. They've become so prevalent on our school campuses that teens often call the bathrooms the jewel rooms. By 2017, 10% of 11th graders reported that they had vaped in the last 30 days. 1 in 10 kids using a product that can lead to a lifelong addiction and other health problems. I'm proud of the steps that Multnomah County has taken to stop kids from getting a hold of these things. In 2015, we passed an ordinance that prohibits minors from buying and using inhalant delivery systems. We also passed a tobacco retail licensure law, which allowed inspectors to enforce the laws of our county. We've lobbied hard for a state tax on e-cigarettes because we are not allowed to pass one ourselves. But we're not done yet. And I will continue to work on these issues because the impacts of nicotine on a developing brain are lifelong. And no one really understands that when you're 14 years old. So with that, I'm grateful to introduce a powerful ally in this public health effort, our senior senator from Oregon, Ron Wyden.
Thank you, Chair Kafoury, Commissioner Meieran, Dr. Heathers. It's great to be with all of you, and I'm going to be short, and I know you all have some questions. Obviously, this week, Oregon parents are sending their kids back to school. And at the top of a parent's priorities are keeping their kids healthy and ensuring that they're safe at school. And that is top of my mind today, and I think it's something all of us share. This year, parents face a new and growing challenge: easily accessible e-cigarettes. And I think what we ought to do is cut through the smoke and make sure that people get some central facts. The products are highly addictive. They're subject to minimal safety standards and oversight, exposing users to dangerous chemicals like formaldehyde. And they are getting into the hands of more and more young people. I'm the ranking Democrat on the Senate Finance Committee. We have jurisdiction over both trade and taxes, and I have been following these developments, these disturbing developments, for a number of years. For example, years ago, I began to get increasingly concerned about imports, and particularly imports from China. Imports from China have doubled year over year since 2016. And 40% of high school seniors report having used e-cigarettes in the past year. So a new generation of nicotine users has essentially been created almost overnight. And I'll tell you, I believe the companies that are making billions of dollars are downplaying the health risks. And I've seen this before. It's not very different than the playbook that big tobacco ran for decades. An added risk is that e-cigarettes may be contaminated with other substances compounding health problems. So when the Senate comes back next week, I'm going to do two things in my capacity as the ranking member of the Senate Finance Committee, which, as I mentioned, has authority over both trade and taxes. One is to make sure that the recent death in Oregon that's under investigation by state health officials and any others around the country get front and center attention in the United States Senate. And two, I will introduce legislation to address this growing problem by taxing e-cigarettes the same way that traditional cigarettes are taxed. I think it's understood that increasing the price of cigarettes makes it far less likely that teenagers will take up smoking. Certainly, taxing e-cigarettes could give us the opportunity to achieve the same goal. Our country has succeeded in almost eliminating teen smoking. And without going into extended history, I can tell you, I remember when the tobacco executives who were under oath in 1994 told me that nicotine was not addictive. That was a lie. It was a falsehood. It was a smoke screen. And I will tell you, just as I did back then, I'm not just going to take the word of a bunch of big companies who say when they're making their pitches, they're taking care of the health of kids. We can't drop the ball and allow a new generation of young people to become addicted to these dangerous products. So I think we're going to have a couple of introductions. This is almost like the United States Senate, where we yield to each other and all that kind of stuff. Dr. Meieran will be next, and Dr. Charles Heathers, and then we'll take some questions. Dr. Meieran.
Thank you, Senator Wyden, for taking this issue head on, and to Chair Kafoury as well for really just championing this issue in Multnomah County. I approach these issues from a number of different perspectives. I come at this as a policymaker, as a county commissioner. I also come at this from the frontline perspective of an emergency physician, seeing people coming into the ER with severe lung diseases, with exacerbations, with illness, with addictions issues. And I also see this, perhaps most importantly right now, from the perspective of a mom of a kid in middle school and a kid in high school. The CDC has really warned us about the dangers of e-cigarettes and vaping since the inception and these devices first appeared on the scene. And the U.S. Surgeon General has warned that vaping among youth has reached epidemic levels. And what is very concerning, people think that use of these e-cigarettes and vaping is harmless, that it's steam instead of smoke. And talking about a smoke screen, as Senator Wyden mentioned, it's really, there's a vape screen going on as well, I would say. These devices have never been proven to help people quit smoking. And they have been shown to increase the risk that teens will smoke regular cigarettes later on. So as I said, in the emergency department, we so frequently see people come in for exacerbations of chronic lung diseases and for acute infections. And, you know, I think one of the reasons people think that these things may be safe, they don't have the additives, as many additives as traditional cigarettes. But make no mistake, they have additives, and these additives are even more dangerous. The nicotine is even more dangerous because they don't have that deterrent effect of kind of the you know, the not so great taste maybe of traditional cigarettes. So they deliver the high levels of nicotine without the deterrent. A pod of one product, Juul, that Chair Kafoury mentioned, for example, has the nicotine of 20 cigarettes, one pod. And we're seeing some of the health consequences now, including the death that I think will be talked about as well and is being investigated. I know I and my colleagues in the emergency department have really heightened our alertness for any of these illnesses we traditionally see. And now the question is, well, do you vape? And so many people do. And for kids in whom the use is rampant, there are a host of health consequences. Nicotine really adversely affects the developing brain in particular, and it could cause the addiction, increased risk of mood and attention problems, and decreased memory. We talk a lot about mental health issues that we're seeing in youth in our schools. And with this rampant vaping and e-cigarette use, this can be exacerbated. So I have a daughter in high school and son in middle school, as I said, and the use is rampant. They're literally not vaping, not just in the bathrooms, but in the classrooms. So we need to do everything we can to address this, and I so appreciate Senator Wyden and the efforts you are making to do this. Thank you. And with that, I would like to introduce our Health Department Director, Dr. Patricia Charles Heathers.
Thank you, Commissioner Meieran. In public health, we want everyone to live fully, to enjoy good health, and be free from chronic disease and addiction. This isn't always an individual choice. There are things we can do as a community to encourage healthy behavior and discourage things we know lead to disease and death. Tobacco and nicotine control is fundamental. Consider this. Most kids vape because the e-liquids come in fruit and candy flavors. They believe these things are safer than they truly are. There are unknown risks from unregulated liquids and by using e-cigarettes to inhale marijuana. The Center for Disease Control is investigating a multi-state outbreak of severe pulmonary disease associated with e-cigarette usage. More than 200 people have been hospitalized and 2 have died, including an Oregon resident. But there are other risks we know a lot about. Young people who vape may be more likely to use tobacco products when they're adults. And studies are showing an association between youth nicotine use and behavioral problems such as depression, anxiety, and other substance abuse in later life. We pass laws to keep teens from buying these products. We inspect stores to make sure they're not selling to teens, and we fine those vendors who do so. But money speaks. Taxes do change behavior, especially on consumption by youth. And taxes create revenue that can be directed towards prevention and health promotion, and that is good public health policy. We will now open up for questions and answers.
Chair Kafoury, yeah, please.
Thank you. Do we have questions for our speakers?
I just have a question for Senator Wyden. Is there any relationship with China with this, or was that just something else you were mentioning?
No, what concerned me, and I'll go back through it a number of years ago, it looked like imports were dramatically on the rise. And I was concerned about the imports coming from China. And the statistic I gave to you, I believe 40% increase, ought to be the kind of jaw-dropping number that wakes everybody up in the Senate. So what I was concerned about in 2015, in my view, has been validated by the most recent data. We can get you the agency, I believe it's the International Trade Commission, but that's why I'm concerned about it, is that there's a real flood of product coming in.
And this may be for anyone
deaths that have been, and the illnesses that have been rising across the country have been related to THC, and many of those, the CDC is saying black market. Although this one in Oregon was based on investigation on cannabis dispensary purchase, is that concerning for you guys that people in Oregon are buying things black market and putting them in e-cigarettes?
So I can speak to that. For the record, I'm Dr. Jennifer Vines. I'm the Deputy Public Health Officer for the Health Department and a family physician. So our state public health colleagues are actively investigating a death that they reported publicly yesterday that was severe lung illness linked to vaping. So far, you mentioned marijuana and marijuana components. So far across the country, this is we're at a case count of over 200 as of last week, based on information from the Centers for Disease Control. The investigation is ongoing, but so far there is no specific link to a certain device, a certain drug, a certain additive that links these cases. So Oregon has not released any specifics about their particular investigation. So I would just correct the record that I don't think we know the details of what might have led to the death.
I want to amplify that point because there obviously is great concern about what's going on the streets, and I very much share the doctor's view. So you have to start with the proposition that the American Vaping Association, which is, of course, the industry group, says that the most recent problems are linked to folks on the street injecting THC into vape pens. And the argument is that that saves money on the commercially available variety, and then they can be sold. So I want you to get a sense of what I believe the federal issue is, because these are wonderful health officials, and I'm not going to play doctor here. Too often back there, members of Congress do, and the country does not exactly benefit from it. So I have read the reports about these severe lung illnesses and hospitalizations that seem to be connected to vaping. And we did some checking, and it's our understanding that neither the Centers for Disease Control nor the physicians treating the patients have conclusively determined what is causing the illness, which I think is very much in sync with what the doctor has just said. But I'll tell you, this rash of illnesses only underscores my concern that more needs to be done to prevent middle and high schoolers from starting vaping in the first place. And I know the industry is going to pitch and pitch and pitch. I watched it for years when I was a young member of the House of Representatives, and I had a full head of hair and rugged good looks. And I watched this industry just pitch and pitch and pitch. And finally, we got them under oath. Raised their right hand in 1994. Nobody had asked them in this kind of public forum. I said, is nicotine addictive? They said, no. And that was a key catalyst in producing the $250 billion settlement, which has made a real difference in terms of reducing smoking. So what we know, in my view, is we ought to be doing more in the prevention area. We know that young people are responsive to pricing of nicotine products. So that's what I'm doing something about in the effort to have these e-cigarette taxes. And I just think that it's my responsibility as the ranking Democrat on the Senate Finance Committee to end the tax exemption for e-cigarettes, because I think that can be a part of any responsible solution. So I want to be clear, I very much share the doctor's point with respect to the medicine here, and I'm not trying to play medicine. But I do know a little bit about history. And I know a bit about the history of these industries. And I think Dr. Meieran touched on it as well. They're always trying to figure out the next way to get their young customers before the law and the rules catch up. You know, they go to the flavoring, they go to this, they go, go to that. The stakes are too high here for us to sit it out. And that's what we're talking about. If you want to change behavior, the evidence shows you can do it with taxes.
I have a question more specifically about the Oregon case, and I know you just said it's under investigation, but is there anything you can tell us about it? I mean, the press release said it was from a dispensary, so are we to assume that it was a liquid pod, or because there is a way that you can dry vape whole flower? Can you tell us a little bit more about the circumstances of this? I know you don't know what substance exactly it was, but
Right. So you do have the press release that does mention cannabis, but again, the big picture is that many cases have reported cannabis use in their vaping products, but not all. So we haven't pinpointed a cause or a common factor among the illnesses. At least Centers for Disease Control has not. I can't share more details other than it was an adult, and that is all I know, and that is all I think we're releasing at this point.
But there was cannabis in the product that was vaped.
I cannot speak to that. That would be a question for the state.
Say if it was a young adult?
I can say it was a middle-aged adult.
I think one of the things people are struggling with is vaping's been around a long time, and suddenly we're seeing this concern, and that's what we're struggling with. Where's it coming from? I guess that's what you're struggling with too. It's not. You're not going to tell me, well, there's more because more people are vaping, and that kind of thing. It's just.
Again, the investigation is ongoing. It's being spearheaded by Centers for Disease Control, and they're looking at cases of severe respiratory illness where infectious causes have been ruled out, and there's been some vaping associated ahead of the illness.
And I'm sorry, real quick, I would challenge that assumption that this is a product that's been around for a long time. I don't think it has been around very long. And we have aggressively, at the county level, taken these concerns to heart when we have seen this dramatic increase from a product that wasn't available a few years ago to something that, as we hear, 10, 20, 30% of our high school students are using. And the myths out there, it's been drilled into their heads since they're tiny that cigarettes are bad, cigarettes are evil. They have all that knowledge. They don't understand this product. There's not the same campaign against it. The taxes are wildly different, as Senator Wyden is trying to address at a federal level, which we are strongly supportive of. But there's a very strong myth out there that this is safer and more healthy than traditional cigarettes, which, if we can do anything, in addition to taxing this product, it's to get the word out that is just not true.
And I want to just amplify on this as well in terms of why I'm going to try to marshal the federal government to aggressively, tackle this. I think if you think about it from a public health standpoint, you just automatically say it would be better if you had an off-ramp for smokers wanting to quit. And that's kind of what some of the sponsors of e-cigarettes are trying to say. My concern is, and why I'm standing here with these dedicated healthcare professionals, is I think that e-cigarettes may be acting as an on-ramp to nicotine addiction, an on-ramp to a lifetime of nicotine addiction for millions of middle and high school students. So let's just kind of think about it. A Juul may be the first step towards picking up the first pack of cigarettes, number one. And even vaping isn't risk-free. Users can be subject, as I said, to formaldehyde, heavy metals, other dangerous chemicals. Nicotine's been tied to an array of cardiovascular problems. We've talked about the hospitalizations. And when you have the number of high school students using e-cigarettes nearly doubling over the last year, I think this needs to be treated as a serious public health challenge, and you can't just look the other way and say, well, we'll deal with it, when an epidemic grows. I think the time to deal with it is now, and for me, that starts next week. Next week in the United States Senate.
And can I just, one other, I just wanted to, just in terms of I want to raise the specter here of the prescription opioid epidemic, because I think there are some shades of that. Prescription opioids were around for a very long time, much longer than this, with the pharmaceutical companies saying these are safe, these aren't addictive, you can use these without, I mean, this is what happened that I saw play out in the emergency department. And I think we have a similar situation here where maybe we can learn from the past and not make those same mistakes and start to nip that in the bud before it becomes what we've seen with the opioid epidemic.
Can I ask you a quick follow-up question about these respiratory illnesses? Can you describe a little bit more what you're talking about? Is it like a pneumonia or something different? What is it exactly?
I mean, I have not personally seen, so I don't know what the specifics are of any of those cases, but we do know that generally any sort of irritant or chemical, even things that are, presumably, sort of safe in any other context, should not be breathed into your lungs. I mean, air is what should be breathed into your lungs, maybe some inhaled medications that we know about. But otherwise, you can get a pneumonia that arises really from a chemical irritation. It could be an infectious etiology. There could be a fungus. There could be bacteria. I think we really don't know what the source is. That's why all these investigations are being done. But if someone comes, and there can just be sort of a reactive airway component. So it just hits, your airways don't like it and they say no. So I think that's what we're really looking at as these investigations go forward. And Dr. Wyden.
So I can share a bit more from Centers for Disease Control, who has put out the call to healthcare providers to be on the lookout for what they're calling severe lung disease. So patients so far have shown up with cough, trouble catching their breath, chest pain, sometimes nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and in general just feeling tired. They may have fever or they may have some weight loss. And so many of them have required supplemental oxygen, so that's usually delivered through a nasal tube or a mask, and some have actually required what we call mechanical ventilation, so they've actually had to be on a breathing machine because of the severity of their lung disease.
Probably time for just one more question.
Yeah, one last question. You.
Go
I
ahead.
wanted to ask, Senator, I think a while ago you were one of the people looking into companies like Juul, looking at their marketing practices to see if they were specifically sort of marketing to teens. Did anything ever come of that? Did they respond to your questions?
Certainly the industry has not been particularly forthcoming. I've worked with a number of parents groups, for example, and that's why it is so important to not delay any longer. I mean, you got these parents groups talking about literally in their classroom, they've got people vaping. Now, what does that say to young people? I mean, normally, when you think about a classroom, I mean, you don't think about questionable health practices in effect being legitimized in front of a group of students. When I heard about that, I said, God, I've heard about kids having muffins and whatnot, but not like vaping in front of the class. And all of us are parents, and I'm an older parent with my wife, so we're hearing about this all the time. We're going to have to wrap up. I really think, I'm just going to close with this. I think Oregon and Multnomah County, you got kind of the NBA all-stars, really, of these four people, and I'm trying to back them up. And I will tell you, my views on this are very much colored, going back over 20 years to the tobacco executives who brazenly lied to the American people when the evidence was overwhelming. Brazenly looked at the TV cameras, swore an oath, and brazenly lied to the American people. And I'm watching this industry now, and apropos of your last point, everything they do sounds like a pitch, and that's why I wanted to go through this matter of them linking it to what goes on, on the streets. I share the doctor's view that these are not conclusive judgments, but they're sure looking to try at every opportunity to say, well, we're useful in terms of getting people not to be addicted to nicotine, and then they always try to explain away all of these other problems.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.